So like Gav said, like my background is actually a psychologist. So I served in that area for a while, but ever since doing a couple of years serving with Power to Change overseas, I wanted to be involved in helping for the Great Commission. And so my wife and I, we got involved with working with Power to Change on university campuses just up in Sydney here. And just did evangelism discipling for 10 years. And it was during that time, just saw lots of people, friends in ministry, all different types of ministry, didn't discriminate, sometimes not doing well. And then when they would leave, it would be bad actually, really bad. And so after about 10 years of doing that, I went back, like Gav said, to start thinking about this area. And since that time, I've been continue to work with Power to Change, but actually related to the development and the well-being of our missionaries. I also have a small private practice where I do some therapy with some Christian workers and also help out with some psychological assessments for people going into ministry, looking at those kinds of things. But for me, this is really my interest, my desire to encourage people in ministry, actually. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and that you've come along today. Because a lot of the literature does talk about how people in pastoral ministry, there's quite a large percentage that do cease ministry early. And that could be around a whole raft of issues, generally categorised as something to do with stress or burnout or something like that. But to be honest, lots of people in ministry do well. And they're motivated and it's meaningful. And actually that's my interest as well. What promotes that? And so that's probably what I'm more interested in. Not just the managing the negative, although that's part of it, but how do you promote that? Like, who wants to be just not burnt out? Like, you know, that's not the goal. So that's been my real interest. So today what we're going to look at is we're going to look at basically what I want to do is look at a model or give you a framework for trying to understand how does this type of stuff work? How does this, doing well or not doing well, what's a bit of a map or a framework to help us think about that? And then we're going to look at only 3 big levers that we could pull on in that model to try to, depending on how I'm going, what might be helpful to do. So we're going to look at this model that's on your handout there. And it's basically called the Job Demands Resources Model. And what that basically says is that any work environment, and we're talking particularly about pastoral ministry, but to be honest, it's really flexible. So if you're in a bit of a bivocational setting or whatever's going on, like this is quite a helpful general framework. And what it basically says is that any work or home or type of situation, you could think about it in terms of things that are demanding or job demands or ministry job demands or things that are just demanding about that environment I'm in, and things that are resourcing, demands and resources. And those 2 things, they kind of kick off 2 somewhat independent psychological processes. So there's demands in life, there's resources in life, and they kick off 2 somewhat independent processes. The first one we might call, up there it's on your handout, it's called the health impairment process, but basically all it means, it's about stress. It's the stress process. And stress is going on all the time. That's one process. When we're talking about ministry, we might talk about ministry job demands. They're things that take energy from us. And that energy, if it's not replenished, maybe because we've got too many or the wrong type or we've had them for too long or whatever, they can drain our energy and lead to that middle thing there, which we'll call burnout, and I'll talk about that in a moment. And that burnout is a psychological state, and that will actually tend to predictably lead to some negative outcomes, personal outcomes, work outcomes. That's kind of like the top line. The bottom line, though, is kicked off by resources. And we'll talk about different types today. But basically those resources, they can actually generate a motivational process. So this bottom line here, that's about motivation. And that leads to this motivated state in ministry, which we'll talk about that, called engagement. That's the psychological state too. And when people are engaged in ministry, that leads to some predictably good positive outcomes. So what we're going to be talking about is two processes. And what I want to say is both of them we need to think about. It's not like the top line's bad, the bottom line's good. It's actually not like that. They're different. And it's right to have good demands in your life. It's right to feel tired sometimes. It's right to even feel stressed sometimes. But if that's not managed, things can go astray. And same with the bottom line. You know, it's right to be motivated. So both of these kinds of processes we need to think about. But often what's happened to date is that when people talk about doing well in ministry, all we think about is the top line and getting rid of stuff. And I want to say, I don't think that's actually the way to go. And definitely that's not what most of the literature it would say either. So that's what we're going to do is look at this framework, and hopefully it'll give you a bit of a map to think about, well, how am I going on both of those kinds of processes? And depending on how I'm going, how do I actually jig some things to actually, before the Lord, help me get engaged in some ways. But, so I've got, 120 slides to flick on through, and you've got I don't know how many pages that is, Gav, 8 pages of handouts. The goal is not to get through my slides, nor to get through all the handouts. So the goal is for this to be useful to you. So please stop me at any time. This will be much more useful if you're like, yeah, well, actually I just want to, can you say a bit more about that? Or what about this? Or what about the other? Please do that. This will be much, much more better. Yeah.
Yeah. So something that's rattling around in my head, you said, I'm paraphrasing, I probably got this wrong, the top line is not bad.
Yeah, we're going to talk about both of these processes. They're just basically psychological processes. And what can happen is we can think, oh, stress equals bad. But what I want to say is, no. It'll be a little bit more, it's a little bit more important than that, but we're going to talk about that for sure.
Because it's not that stress, I can accept that stress isn't bad. Stress can be a motivator.
Correct.
But what it's led to there with burnout and negative, so you're not saying they're not bad, they are bad.
Oh, they are bad.
Oh,
but if you want to think about it, what these things here are
the first 2 boxes, they're not bad.
No, these are like our realities.
Yeah, good.
And we're going to think about, well, what's going on, and they are our levers that we can pull. Yeah. So, but that's perfect. Thank you for doing that. That's exactly what we want to do all morning. That's right. We've got a special couple of whatever over there later on. But so please do that, because that's actually really important. So let me just actually start in and talk about. So like I've said, these are two processes, and the big triggers are right at the front of the model. These are causal. These things are what causes the back. But these middle psychological processes are pretty important to understand. And so we might just actually talk about, what do we mean when we say that word burnout? Like, you hear it all the time. So what would I mean as a psychologist mean when I say that word? And there's a definition on your handout there. Burnout is a psychological syndrome in response to chronic stresses related to the occupation. The 3 key dimensions of this response is an overwhelming emotional exhaustion, feelings of cynicism and detachment from the job, and a sense of ineffectiveness or lack of accomplishment. So a lot of people say burnout, and usually, to be honest, it might not be burnout. But I'm not saying it's not significant, but it's just a word that gets used a lot. Technically, what burnout is, it's not actually a thing, it's a constellation of 3 things that will travel together. The root of burnout, or the first thing about burnout, is that sense of emotional exhaustion. I am just a spent shell. I've got nothing left in the tank. I mean, not even fumes. They're gone. So actually exhaustion, or that real kind of, I've got no energy left, that's usually the root of burnout. That's usually where burnout starts, but that's not burnout. That's exhaustion. So burnout is almost like the root of burnout is that emotional exhaustion. And actually that will come because when demands take my energy and the energy isn't replaced. It's as simple as that. If I'm giving out energy and it's not being replaced, let me tell you, I don't care how spiritual a person is, God has made us embodied beings. Energy out will lead to that flat line emotional exhaustion. And when people are emotionally exhausted, actually the second element will tend to start to raise its head, and that's cynicism. Cynicism, or a sense of detachment from the job or people, it's almost like a way that we try to cope. If I'm cynical about what we're doing, I don't have to care as much. The mission statement. We've got to have one. Every church has a mission statement, but, we don't really do it. We just got to have one. If I'm cynical about what I'm doing, I don't have to care, actually. But if I'm on about it, well, that's going to involve me giving more energy. Sometimes cynicism is like, it's the second thing to start to go when you're burning out. Because I just don't have the energy to care anymore. So it's actually a way to cope. I'm cynical about what we're doing. I'm cynical about the program, or I'm cynical about whatever. And the third element is actually a sense of low accomplishment. And usually that's distorted. It's that kind of, what good are we doing here anyway? The RSL, they got a much better sense of community than we have. We're not really having an impact here. No one would know if I wasn't doing my job. All of that kind of stuff. That's usually distorted, but that's actually what they start to travel together. And if I've still got a little bit of energy and I'm starting to feel like, what good am I doing here anyway? What do you think I try to do? Work even harder. What's that going to do? Get me even more exhausted. And so you can actually start to go with exhaustion, cynicism, low accomplishment, and then it can go brrrr. That's one profile. That's burnout. It's not just tiredness. It's a profound experience. So that's what burnout is. The second thing is engagement. That's a different psychological state. It's about motivation. And for me, when I think about ministry engagement, I think about Romans 12:11. Never be lacking in zeal, but keeping your spiritual fervour, serving the Lord. Mate, that's it. Zeal in serving the Lord. I only wish Paul had spent a little bit more time just unpacking how do you keep doing that. But that's actually what we're talking about. So what is engagement in ministry? It's that. It's vigour. I've got energy for this task. I'm dedicated to it. I think this is significant. This is worth me giving myself to. Even giving myself to self-sacrificially. And you know what? When I'm doing it, there's a positive sense of absorption within that. So that's actually a different psychological state. And that will lead to positive outcomes. So those two terms, you might hear them bandied about a bit. So I just thought it worthwhile just talking a little bit about them. Does anyone have any comments or questions about what do we mean when we talk about those terms? Yeah.
What do you mean by ministry job resources?
Yeah, we're definitely going to talk about those, but they're aspects of our job or our ministry situation that help us either do our job, accomplish tasks, have a sense of we're growing here, as in personally, I'm growing myself, and actually they're things that help reduce or help me meet some of those demands.
So they tend to be processes or mechanistic type of things, or
Yeah,
external things, or is that
they're going to be aspects of our job.
right?
We're going to talk about those for sure. Yeah. But any comments about just these two terms before we move on? Yeah.
You talked about one profile of what burnout looks like. I take it there are multiple profiles of what it might look like, so different forms.
Technically, burnout are these three things going on.
Yep.
Now, how people get into that, there's a couple of different ways, but probably not heaps actually. But what burnout is, it's those three things going together. Often people will use the word burnout, and actually it might not be burnout. It might be post-traumatic stress disorder. It might be depression. It might be anxiety. So they're just a slightly different, but sometimes burnout can trigger those things. And so often people might, when they get in touch with me, often they might have those things, but the root of that has been a burnout. So it's a little pedantic, but just because there can be some bleeding of terms, I think it's important to figure out what's going on, because burnout is about work. Often when a person leaves the work environment, their burnout isn't there. But I might have this lingering depression that's been triggered by that. So all I'm trying to say is, these terms, it's a bit pedantic, but it can be helpful to be clear on, particularly something that's so popular in the vernacular, like the word burnout.
Because I think the term itself can give you a sense of, this is like a breakdown.
Yeah.
Explosion.
Yeah.
But that's not.
It's not true.
Always what it looks like.
This is a dimension. You could think about burnout as being like a continuum, because my exhaustion might be there, my cynicism might be there, my low accomplishment might be there. And so again, it's not like a disease, I caught burnout. It's a dimension actually we're on. And that's why it's always good to kind of get help sooner rather than later. That's a great question. Yeah.
Just out of interest, and you'll get to it. So you'd have this extreme option. If burnout is connected to work, just leave the job, leave the role, you'll be okay. What you're moving towards is we've got to do better at ministry, managing the tension of the first two boxes.
Excellent. And that's what I would say. So, or Christopher Ash has this great line. He says, what we want to be on about is being a living sacrifice, not a burnt sacrifice. I want to be able to be a sustainable living sacrifice in my ministry, not one that burns out and jumps out. And so that's a great, Christopher Ash, it's a great line. His book's worth it for that one line. No, it's a great book actually, yeah. So, so that's actually what I'm talking about. Because, again, like these are two processes. You can be high on burnout, high on engagement actually. That's a very kind of, it's probably you can be like that actually, but it doesn't take much to go, but you can be like that, you can be like that, you can be like that and bored in ministry. Oh, you know, been doing it now for X years. You know, I'm just blabbing on. Forgive me. I know we got a time schedule. So I'm just trying to say that these are dynamic things, and that's why what we want to be looking at. I want to emphasise it's not wrong to have good ministry job demands. No, actually, that's probably a key. The emphasis is that it's not about just and only getting rid of job demands or anything on the top lines is bad. No, the key is being zealous and conducting your ministry with fervour and managing and having the right job demands and having the right resources to help you accomplish those. So basically what we're going to talk about is three things. We want to think about what are the right job demands before the Lord for you to be engaging in as first step. The second step is about how do we manage the chronic energy depletion that comes from being in ministry. And thirdly, we might want to think about how do we constantly replenish the right resources to meet the right demands. And we're going to talk particularly about spiritual resources as the key there. So if you like, they're three big levers that I want to talk about today. They're going to govern our time. Three levers that you can pull on in terms of figuring out how you're going and what might I need to do? So I'm kind of hoping that each of you might want to think, actually, one of these, they might be my big one I need to walk away with, my one big application point. So that's kind of where we're going to go. So let's jump right in, and we're going to start by talking about the top line, which is called the health impairment process, and we'll see how we go. We'll see how we go there. So if you look on page 2 there, there's a definition of what's meant by job demands. And I'm wondering, would someone with a big voice like to read that out? Read out that paragraph for us. Someone who doesn't mind reading out loud. Anyone?
Sure.
Thanks, mate.
Job demands are any aspect of the job, tasks to do, relationship dynamics, even physical environments that require energy and effort to meet. Although job demands are not necessarily negative, they do cost us energy that, if not replaced because there are too many or we have them for too long, can deplete energy resources, leading to burnout. Burnout, in turn, inevitably results in negative personal and work outcomes such as anxiety, depression, lower personal initiative, reduced work quality and quantity, and greater absenteeism and intentions to leave.
Great, thanks very much. So what do we mean by job demands or ministry job demands? Well, actually, they could be anything that's doing one of those things. Anything that takes energy from you. Might be the particular tasks you do in your role. Oh, they take energy from me. Might be some of the relational dynamics you have going on. They take energy from me. They might be actually some of the physical environment or something physical going on. You know, the printer does not work properly, and I've got to get out the bulletin or whatever. That's a job demand, actually. So what is a job demand? It can be anything that takes energy from you. Now that introduces a very important thing. We can have what's called, think about our job demands, you can categorise them maybe as things that we might call challenge demands. And they're like positive challenges. They're probably the things that you got into ministry to do in the first place. Aspects of your job that's like, yeah, that's what we're on about. They're challenge demands, positive things. But there's probably other things that we might call hindrance demands. Like, for example, the photocopier that just doesn't work. It's hindering me from doing what I just want to get up. Or sometimes there might be something else. Sometimes it's like, you know, if it wasn't for that elder, then we'd really be able to move forward with what we're doing. Sometimes it's relationship stuff that can be hindrance demands. Sometimes it might be other things that I feel like, usually it's like, if only I didn't that's probably a hindrance demand. Sometimes there's threatening demands. For example, sometimes financial viability. You know, are we going to be here? I'm worried about next year. Well, that's not a challenge, or it might be a bit of a challenge for some. For some of us, it might not be a hindrance. For some of us, I experience this as a threat. Now, can you feel each of those feels very different? All of them will take energy from me, but it's helpful to think about which type are they, because a hindrance demand, it's going to hurt me a lot more. You know, if you're following up a lot of people coming out of Easter who want to find out more about Jesus, is that going to take energy from you? Yep. Is that a bad thing? No. It's great. But you know, I've got this protracted conflict that's just been blown up, and now I'm sucked into it as well. That's a very different type of energy drain. Do you kind of feel that difference? It's really important for you to understand what's going on for me. What are my demands? What's taking energy from me? So I want to give you a chance actually just to turn to the person next to you and talk about what are your demands. List them out. Could be role related, could be interpersonal related, could be something different, but just jot that down. We want to talk about that. But before I give you a chance to do that, I just want to run through quickly the top 8 Australian Christian worker job demands. So these are kind of like types of things, but you might resonate a little bit with them. What are the usual things that turn up for people who are actually struggling. And we'll start up number one with this one, which is the demands of high expectations. I'd probably say that that's one of the biggest issues that drain us, is the sense of high expectations. Now that might be high expectations for ministry success or personal performance or even personal perfection. Or maybe even my family's perfection, how they're seen. But expectations that I have about what should be happening, what I should be seeing, they're often one of the biggest drains for people. And that might come from, people might think it's come from the congregation. It might come from the network. It might come from the Lord even. But when you push, there's often a fair bit of the self that colludes with that. And the problem with that is it can lead to me actually thinking that maybe I shouldn't have the same limits that everyone else has. Demands of high expectations, what should be happening. That can result in a lack of limit setting. That's often, I'd say that's probably the biggest one that can actually really have an impact long term. The second one, I'd say, is this issue to do with ambiguity or role conflict or elements of control. Like, how much control do I have to do my job? Oh, we don't do things like that here, Grant. What? No, but that's the best way to have a youth group. We don't do things like that here, Grant. You can't move that, whatever, table or something. That's about a lack of control. Sometimes it's about a type of role conflict. You know, I feel like I need to do this, but I also need to do that. But if I do that, then I won't be able to do this. I won't be able to, or this group, they really want me to do that, but if I do that, I can't please that group. And that's conflict, that's role conflict. But the biggest one, I'd say, often comes about ambiguity. Am I doing a good job? How do I know if I've done a good job this week? Have I done enough this week? What should I be doing? That can lead to a lot of reactivity. So if you've got really high expectations, and particularly, actually, it's a little bit ambiguous of what I think I should be doing, then I can easily lead to just an incredible variety of tasks that I'll be taking on. This is a list that came from an Australian researcher in 1979 for a pastor. This is all you have to do if you're a pastor in 1979. You've got to be an educator, you've got to be a social reformer, you've got to be an evangelist, an organiser and a visionary, a pastor, a preacher, a priest and a scholar. It's easy. And where you're struggling, someone will let you know. Let alone today. You've got to be a social media expert, you've got to be a blah, 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 computer engineer. Anyway, so can you see that? High expectations, somewhat ambiguity, what I should be doing. It leads to extreme task variety and inevitably work overload. And so you can start to see things. So there come to some of the most common job demands, the big four I would actually call those. There's other things that people talk about, we're going to cut them quickly. Just the work-home interference, that can be a play. When am I off? Interpersonal conflicts, like they are just, that's a part of, where two or three are gathered, you're going to have conflict. Where two or three Christians are gathered, they're going to have the Lord and really heavy conflict. That's true. But they're really wearing on us, most of us. Isolation, you can feel totally isolated in ministry sometimes, particularly if all of my energy goes in meeting other people's needs. It's hard to have friends a lot for myself. I can feel very isolated. Changes in society, financial demands and the effort-reward imbalance. I'm giving out so much, but I'm just really struggling to X, Y, Z. Fairness. Anyway, we could go on. What I'd like you to do, though, is actually take a little bit of time, maybe by yourself or with a person next to you. And this is where I'd always say we need to start. Start by asking these questions. This is where I always start with people. Actually, just tell me what's going on. What are your demands that you're facing? And so I might take a table like you have on your handout there, and I'd actually just write them out. Let's just list the demands. Usually people say, You have no idea, Grant, there's not enough rows on that table. I'm like, that's okay, we've got a Word document. Just add some more. But get it out of here onto there. And I'd like to see, what is it? Preaching might be up there, but that might be a challenge. Spending time with discipling some people, that might be a challenge. Coordinating the church council, that might be a bit of a hindrance. Everyone can have differences there, but anyway, I just encourage you to write out what's some of your big ones. What are your big job demands? And then give me a rating out of 10, where 1 is like, it's a bit of an energy drain, but 10 is like, it's a maximal energy drain. And then let me know, is it a challenge? Is it a hindrance? Is it a threat? Does that make sense? That's the place to start with how are you going, I'd say. So let's just take maybe 5 minutes just to give you a chance to chat with the person next to you and discuss what's some of your demands. And then I might, if people want to share 1 or 2, you don't have to, but we might just share a little bit together and then we'll move on. Yeah. Yep. So just for the recording, so the comment was made, preaching and teaching is a demand, and it was a strong demand of like a 10, but it's a positive challenge. But I'm giving myself to it. Like, it requires me to really give myself to it. But it feels like that's one of those. Who else had preaching or teaching on their demand list? Yep. So yep, quite a few. And did you tend to rate that as a challenge? Anyone have a challenge of that mostly? Yeah. Any hindrances? Yep. So, but that's one of those ones where for a lot of Christian workers, we go into it actually because we want to share. And so it is probably a positive challenge, but there might be a bit of a range in terms of how much of a strain it is on people's lives. Yeah, thank you. That's great. Yeah. Anyone else want to share an example of a demand? Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for sharing those. So 2 that were mentioned again, just for the recording, was like outreach camps. Lots of energy goes into that. High reward. And then there's like government compliance, regulations, red tape. Did anyone else have that kind of stuff on their list? Yeah, I dare say that was in the hindrance category.
Oh yeah.
So yes, that's probably true. So there's challenges there, there's hindrances. For a lot of Christian workers, there might be some commonalities. Let's face it, conflict and red tape, not lots of people call those challenge demands. They pretty typically hindrance demands. And things like preaching and those kind of outreach events, yeah, they're going to be high challenge and probably involve a lot of energy too, but they're good. There can be some things that some people might prefer more than others, so that there can be some that can depend upon the person. Sometimes like personal visitation or chaplaincy work. That can go either way for some people. Sometimes the big strategic planning stuff, that can go either way for some people. Sometimes things like admin, that can go either way for some people. So there is some variability. So it's often worthwhile, if you're working with people, maybe on a team, it's worthwhile asking not just what are your demands, but how do you experience them? And of course, where we want to work on mostly is we want to start with the hindrances and what can we do to reduce some of those. But I always say too, when a person is really tired, sometimes even my challenge demands start to feel like hindrances. When you're going down, another outreach camp, I don't think I've got it actually. And then I feel actually they start to feel like hindrances. That's probably a sign we might be running a bit hot, probably. So that's helpful to start thinking about, like, where are we at? What are our challenge demands? Any other comments before we move on? So step 1 is know your demands. But I also want to say that we probably need to do something about managing our job demands. So whenever you think about stress and problems, You are always going to get the biggest bang for your buck if you intervene at the source of the problem. The golden rule is if anything that I can do to change my list of job demands, let's start there. Because that's always going to have a bigger impact than just trying to, recover from them. I hope that makes sense. The key here, the big point of our first little section, is make sure that you have the right job demands. And what I mean by that is that usually if you've got too many job demands going on, we want to reduce hindrances and focus more on challenges. If I've just got too many job demands going on, I might need to think about how do I reduce my challenge demand from a 10 down to a 7. Or I need to just take off a few challenge demands. Does that make sense? So this is not a counsel of perfection like, we're going to not have any compliance work to do. I know that's not true. But if we can change something about that, how can we assist you with that? That's going to make a big impact because it's like the front of the model rather than just trying to do something to cope down the end. I hope that makes sense. The golden rule is, now that we know our stressors, let's do something about them because that will change the whole rest of the experience. Now, there's many things we could talk about in doing this, but just because of time, I thought I'd want to just talk about something called a control grid. And that's on your handout there. Now, what I mean by a control grid, it's just basically something that you might want to do with someone else, actually. I find it might be better to do it with someone else. But what I do with a control grid is I take each stressor in turn, each of the row in turn, and I ask the question about the stressor, what is it about this thing that I can control? What is it about this thing that I can't control? So let's take, for example, red tape. What is it about the red tape that I can control? What is it about the red tape that I can't control? And then that will give me kind of 2 columns to start to think about. Then I think about what is it that I can control? What is it that I'm doing that I can control? And what is it that maybe I'm not doing that I could control? So what is it that I'm doing? Well, I am actually getting to it. What is it that I'm not doing? Or maybe I could actually elicit some help. Maybe I could get accountability to do it for half an hour a day rather than let it build up. Do you know what I mean there? So maybe there's some things that I could do about it, but I'm not for whatever reason. So first, what is it that I control, what I can't control? In terms of what is it that I can control, is there some things that I could be doing that could help me that I'm not doing? Now that could be helpful to have a discussion with someone else. Sometimes it's hard by yourself to come up with that. But that's what, if anything in this box, that's why I say I want to plan to do that, drawing on the empowering of the Holy Spirit. But there might be some things about the demand that I cannot control. And I've written there, I changed what I've put in your handout there. I've written there, I want to entrust that to God in prayer. So sometimes the things that really drain us is actually in that list. And I just ruminate about it. I just that's where I spend my time. And that actually really is what the big drain is. With things that I can't control, I probably want to write them down, and then I want to entrust them or give them over to the Lord. I think I wrote down there, commit it to God in prayer. I'll be honest with you, often things in that category for me, I worry about them with the Lord. That's what I do. My prayer is worrying about them with God in the room. That's what I want to entrust that over to Him. I can't do anything about this actually, Lord. And so I want to give that over to Him. Now you might want to have some kind of a practice that might help you with that. I know for some people what they might have like a prayer bowl or an entrusting bowl. And whenever I notice I'm starting to think about that, I just write the phrase on the bit of thing. The board's decision about our property. And whenever I write that down, and I give myself a physical representation of, Lord, I'm giving this over to you, and I want to leave that with you. So what we're trying to do, we're trying to engage somewhat with this list in a helpful way. We want to think about, what am I doing? What am I not doing? Is there something that I can entrust to God? Is there some way that I can actually stop myself ruminating about this, but give that over? Now you can do that with like red tape. You can do that with conflict. You can do that with any one of your lists, actually. I can do that actually with my preaching. Like, what can't I control about my preaching? I can't control how people will tend to take it. What I can control, well, I can do my blood preparation. Maybe there's some things that I'm not doing that I could do that could actually reduce my strain. Oh, do you see how we're trying to engage with the problems there? So I find a control grid can be a helpful thing for people just as an initial step with starting to play with the list. Of course, there's other things we might do. Maybe there's some things on that list I just should not be doing because of how God's wired me and what He's calling me to do. But that's actually another topic. So I just wanted to kick off with that little bit of a start. That's an idea. We're starting to talk about the top line, and the first thing is about trying to think about having the right demands on your list. Maybe there's some things that what I can control, maybe I should stop doing that at all. That could be another question. So we want to have the right demands on that list, and we want to play with that list. That's the first thing to do. That will give you, let me tell you, that will give you a sense of hope straight away. In fact, the mere fact that you've written it down and you're talking to someone about a control grid, that is going to help. It will really help. But we're just starting there. Yeah. I want to give you a chance to have a stand-up break for 5 or 10 minutes, but any questions about that just as we start? Yeah. The golden rule about struggling with energy in ministry is, first thing, know your demands. And if you can do anything about that demand list, let's start there. So that's a good place to stop. Having the right demands, and then we're just going to actually have a bit of a think about what can I do with them, even if I can't get rid of some. Yeah, play. Well, let's have a bit of a pause, give you a chance to stand up, refresh, and then we're going to come back and we'll kick on. So.